Will Stalingrad turn into a second Verdun? Wrote Colonel Grosskreutz on 4 October. That's what one's asking here with great concern. After Hitler's speech at the Berlin Sportpalast 4 days before, claiming that nobody would ever shift them from their position on the Volga, Grosskreutz and others sensed that the Sixth Army would not be allowed to break off this battle, whatever the consequences. It has even become a matter of prestige between Hitler and Stalin. The great German assault against the factory district in northern Stalingrad had started well on 27 September, but by the end of the second day, German divisions knew that they were in for their hardest fight yet. The October complex and the Barricade gun factory had been turned into fortresses as lethal as those of Verdun. If anything, they were more dangerous because the Soviet regiments were so well hidden. Officers from Gurdjieff's 308th Rifle Division of Siberians, on reaching the Barricade factory and its railway sidings, took in the dark, towering bulk of the repair shops, the wet, glistening rails already touched in spots with rust, the chaos of shattered freight cars, the piles of steel girders scattered in confusion over a yard as large as a city square, the heaps of coals and reddish slag, the mighty smokestacks pierced in many places by German shells. Gurdjieff designated 2 regiments to defend the plant and the 3rd to hold the flank, including the deep ravine running through to the Volga from the workers' housing estate, which was already in flames. It soon became known as the Gully of Death. The Siberians wasted no time. The German infantry discovered over the next few days that Gurdjieff's Siberian division did not sit waiting for them. The Russians made attacks every day at first and last light, an NCO from the 100th Jaeger Division reported. Chuikov's appallingly wasteful policy of repeated counterattacks astonished German generals, although they were forced to acknowledge that it wore down their troops. The most successful defensive measures, however, were the heavy guns on the east bank of the Volga, once their fire plans were coordinated. In the Red October plant, detachments from the 414th Anti-Tank Division had concealed their 45mm and 96mm guns in the rubble, using lumps of discarded metal as camouflage and protection. They were sighted for firing from ranges as short as 150 yards or less. By dawn on 28 September, 2 regiments of the 193rd Rifle Division had also crossed the Volga and rapidly prepared positions. Their housewarming was carried out by massed Stuka attacks the following day. The German advance made further reinforcements an urgent need. The 39th Chuikov's divisions were badly mauled, exhausted, and very short of ammunition. Yet on 5 October, General Golikov, Yeryomenko's deputy commander, crossed the river to pass on Stalin's order that the city be held and the parts occupied by the Germans recaptured. Chuikov disregarded such an impossible instruction. He knew that his only chance of holding on depended on massive artillery bombardments from across the river. The Germans soon made Yeryomenko's urgings irrelevant. After a relatively quiet day on 6 October, they launched a heavy assault on the Stalingrad tractor plant, with the 14th Panzer Division attacking from the southwest and the 60th motorized from the west. One of the 60th's battalions was virtually destroyed by salvos of Katyushas fired at maximum range. The extra elevation was achieved by backing the launcher trucks so that their rear wheels hung over the steep Volga bank. Meanwhile, part of the 16th Panzer Division attacked the northern industrial suburb of Spartakovka, pushing back the remains of the 112th Rifle Division and the 124th Special Brigade. Chuikov's army, now down to a drastically reduced area along the west bank, felt that it was being relentlessly pushed back into the river. The Volga crossings became increasingly vulnerable, with the 62nd Army's perimeters so drastically reduced. German batteries and even machine guns on direct fire ranged in on the landing points.
A narrow pontoon bridge from Zaitseksky Island to the West Bank had been built by a battalion of Volga watermen from Yaroslav. This enabled a constant ant-like stream of bearers to cross during darkness, carrying rations and ammunition. Its small size reduced the target, but for those treading the constantly moving planks, the shells exploding in the river either side made each journey terrifying. Cargo boats were still needed for larger and heavier items, as well as evacuating the wounded. Replacement tanks were taken across by barge. As soon as dusk falls, wrote Grossman, the men responsible for the river crossing come out of their dugouts, bunkers, trenches, and hidden shelters. In that second week of October, a lull occurred in the fighting. Chuikov rightly suspected that the Germans were preparing an even bigger attack, probably with reinforcements. Paulus was under as much pressure from Hitler as Chuikov was from Stalin. On 8 October, Army Group B, on orders from Führer headquarters, had instructed the 6th Army to prepare another major offensive against northern Stalingrad to start at the latest by October 14. Paulus and his headquarters staff were dismayed by their losses. One of his officers noted in the war diary that 94th Infantry Division was reduced to 535 frontline troops, which signifies an average fighting strength per infantry battalion of 3 officers, 11 NCOs, and 62 men. He also described 76th Infantry Division as fought out. Only the 305th Infantry Division, recruited from the northern shores of Lake Constance, could be spared within the 6th Army to strengthen the formations already committed. The Germans, with shouted taunts and leaflets, made no secret of their preparations. The only question was the precise objective. Reconnaissance companies from Soviet divisions were out every night to seize as many tongues as possible. Hapless sentries or ration carriers were dragged back for intensive interrogation, and the prisoner, usually out of sheer terror after all the Nazi propaganda about Bolshevik methods, was only too eager to talk. The intelligence section at 62nd Army Headquarters soon concluded from a combination of sources that the main thrust would again be directed against the tractor plant. The remaining workers there and at the barricade, who had been repairing tanks and anti-tank guns right through the fighting, were either drafted into frontline battalions or, in the case of specialists, evacuated across the Volga. Fortunately for the 62nd Army, their intelligence analysis proved correct. The German objectives were to clear the tractor factory and the brickworks on its southern side, then push on to the Volga bank. Chuikov's risky decision to bring regiments from the Mamayev Kurgan to the northern sectors paid off. However, he was horrified to hear that the Stavka had reduced the Stalingrad front's allocation of artillery ammunition. This was the first hint that a major counterattack was in preparation. Stalingrad, he suddenly realized with mixed emotions, now represented the bait in an enormous trap. On Monday, October 14th at 6 a.m. German time, the 6th Army's offensive began on a narrow front using every available Stuka in General von Richthofen's 4th Air Fleet. The whole sky was full of aircraft, every flak gun firing, bombs roaring down, aircraft crashing, an enormous theater which we followed with. By the second day of the offensive, 15th October, 6th Army Headquarters felt able to record, "The major part of the tractor works is in our hands. There are only some pockets of resistance left behind our front." The 305th Infantry Division also forced the Russians back across the railway lines at the brickworks. That night, after 14th Panzer Division's breakthrough into the tractor works, its 103rd Panzer Grenadier Regiment boldly cut through to the Volga bank by the oil tanks, harried by Soviet infantry attacking out of gullies. Fortunately for 62nd Army, Chuikov had been persuaded to move his headquarters because communications were so bad. The fighting had hardly slackened. The 84th Tank Brigade claimed to have destroyed more than 30 medium and heavy fascist tanks for the loss of 18 of their own. The brigade's junior commanders demonstrated inspiring courage that day. The commissar of a light artillery regiment, Babachenko, was made a hero of the Soviet Union for his bravery when a battery was cut off. The defender's farewell radio message received at headquarters read, "Guns destroyed, battery surrounded. We fight on and will not surrender. Best regards to everyone." Yet using grenades, rifles, and submachine guns, the gunners broke the enemy encirclement and made a fresh stand, helping to restore the sector's line of defense. There were countless cases of unsung bravery by ordinary soldiers, a real mass heroism, as the commissars put it. There were also trumpeted incidents of individual bravery, such as a company commander of 37th Guards Rifle Division, Lieutenant Gonachar, who with a captured machine gun and just 4 men managed to disperse an attacking German force at a critical moment. Nobody knew how many Red Army soldiers died that day, but 3,500 wounded were taken back across the Volga that night. The overworked medical orderlies suffered so many casualties that many of the wounded crawled to the riverbank alone. German commanders out in the steppe demanded constant news of progress in the city. Writing General Strecker to a friend, "Factory walls, assembly lines, the whole superstructure collapses under the storm of bombs, but the enemy simply reappears and utilizes these newly created ruins to fortify his defensive positions." Some German battalions were down to 50 men. They sent back the corpses of their comrades at night for burial. Inevitably, a certain cynicism arose in German ranks about their leadership. Our general, Janek he's called, received the Knight's Cross the day before. General Yeremenko also crossed the river that night to assess the situation for himself. Leaning heavily on a walking stick after his wounds the previous year, he limped up the bank to the overcrowded bunkers of 62nd Army headquarters. The craters and smashed timbers of dugouts which had received direct hits left little to the imagination. Objects and individuals alike were covered in dust and ash. General Zholodev broke down in tears recounting the destruction of his division in the tractor works. Yet next day, after Yeremenko's return, front headquarters had to warn Chuikov that even less ammunition would be available. After the Germans had cut off the Soviet forces north of the Stalingrad tractor plant on the night of 15th October, Chuikov received little encouraging news from them, only many requests from the headquarters of 112th Rifle Division and 115th Special Brigade for permission to withdraw across the Volga. Both headquarters apparently provided false information, claiming that their regiments had been virtually wiped out. This request to withdraw, tantamount to treason after Stalin's order, was rejected. During a lull in the fighting several days later, Chuikov sent Colonel Kaminin to the enclave to check the state of their regiments. He found that 112th Rifle Division still had 598 men left, while 115th Special Brigade had 890. The senior commissar, according to the report, instead of organizing an active defense, did not emerge from his bunker and tried in a panic-stricken way to persuade his commander to withdraw across the Volga. For their betrayal of Stalingrad's defense and exceptional cowardice, the accused senior officers and commissars were later court-martialed by the Military Council of 62nd Army. Their fate is not recorded, but they can have expected little mercy from Chuikov. Diversionary offensives were mounted on 19th October by the Don Front to the northwest and by 64th Army to the south. During the huge battles for the northern industrial sector of the city, house fighting with local attacks and counterattacks had continued in the central districts. One of the most famous episodes of the Stalingrad battle was the defense of Pavlov's house, which lasted for 58 days. At the end of September, a platoon from the 42nd Guards Regiment had seized a 4-story building overlooking a square some 300 yards in from the top of the riverbank. Their commander, Lieutenant Afanasyev, was blinded early in the fighting, so Sergeant Jacob Pavlov took over command. They discovered several civilians in the basement who stayed on throughout the fighting. One of them, Maria Ulyanova, took an active part in the defense. Pavlov's men smashed through cellar walls to improve their communications and cut holes in the walls to make better firing points for their machine guns and long-barreled anti-tank rifles. Whenever panzers approached, Pavlov's men scattered either to the cellar or to the top floor, from where they were able to engage them at close range. The panzer crews could not elevate their main armaments sufficiently to fire back. Zhukov later liked to make the point that Pavlov's men killed more enemy soldiers than the Germans lost in the capture of Paris. Jacob Pavlov, made a hero of the Soviet Union, later became the Archimandrite Kirill in the monastery at Sergivo, formerly Zagorsk, where he attracted a huge following of the faithful that had nothing to do with his fame from Stalingrad. He is now very frail. Another story, more of a vignette gleaned from letters, concerned Lieutenant Charnosov, an artillery observer from the 384th Artillery Regiment. His observation post was at the top of a shell-wrecked building from where he called down artillery fire. His last letter to his wife read, "Hello, Shura. I send kisses to our two little birds, Slavik and Lidusia. I am in good health. I have been wounded twice, but these are just scratches, and so I still manage to direct my battery all right. The time of hard fighting has come to the city of our beloved leader, to the city of Stalin. During these days of hard fighting, I am avenging my beloved birthplace of Smolensk, but at night I go down to the basement where two fair-haired children sit on my lap. They remind me of Slavik and Lida." On his body was found his wife's previous letter. "I am very happy that you are fighting so well and that you have been awarded a medal. Fight to the last drop of your blood and don't let them capture you, because prison camp is worse than death." This exchange of letters was seen as exemplary and also as typical of the moment. They may well be genuine, but like many others, they revealed only a partial truth. The principal communist awards, Hero of the Soviet Union, Order of the Red Banner, Order of the Red Star, were still, of course, taken very seriously by the political authorities, even if the Red Star had become something of a Stakhanovite ration issued to every man who destroyed a German tank. When, on the night of 26 October, the chief of the Manpower Department of 64th Army lost a suitcase containing 40 orders of the Red Banner while waiting for a ferry to cross the Volga, a terrible consternation ensued. One might almost have thought that the defense plans for the whole of the Stalingrad front had been lost. The suitcase was finally rediscovered 2 miles away on the following day. Only a single medal was missing. It may well have been taken by a soldier who, perhaps warming to the idea after a few drinks, decided that his efforts at the front had been insufficiently recognized. The chief of the Manpower Department was put in front of a military tribunal charged with criminal carelessness. Soldiers, on the other hand, had a much more robust attitude toward these symbols of bravery. When one of them received an award, his comrades dropped it in a mug of vodka, which he then had to drink, catching the medal in his teeth as he drained the last drops. The real Stakhanovite stars of the 62nd Army were in fact not the destroyers of tanks, but snipers. A new cult of sniperism was launched, and as the 25th anniversary of the October Revolution approached, the propaganda surrounding this black art became frenzied, with a new wave of socialistic competition for the largest numbers of Fritzes killed. A sniper, on reaching 40 kills, would receive the 4 Bravery Medal and the title of Noble Sniper. The most famous sniper of them all, although not the highest scorer, was Zaitsev in Batyuk's division, who, during the October Revolution celebrations, raised his tally of kills to 149 Germans. He had promised to achieve 150, but was 1 short. The highest scorer, identified only as Zikon, killed 224 Germans by 20 November. For the 62nd Army, the taciturn Zaitsev, a shepherd from the foothills of the Urals, represented much more than any sporting hero. News of further additions to his score passed from mouth to mouth along the front. Zaitsev, whose name means hare in Russian, was put in charge of training young snipers, and his pupils became known as Zaichata, or Leverets. This was the start of the sniper movement in the 62nd Army. Conferences were arranged to spread the doctrine of sniperism and exchange ideas on technique. The Don and Southwest fronts took up the sniper movement and produced their star shots, such as Sergeant Passar of 21st Army. Especially proud of his headshots,
Grossman was fascinated by the character and life of snipers. He got to know Zaitsev well and several others, including Anatoly Chekhov. Chekhov had followed his father, a drunkard, to work in a chemical plant. He had learned the dark sides of life since childhood, but also discovered a love of geography, and now dreamed of different parts of the world during the long days in hides, waiting for a victim to appear. Chekhov turned out to be one of those naturally gifted killers which wars bring out. He had excelled at sniper school, and as a 20-year-old in Stalingrad, he seemed to experience no fear, just as the eagle is never afraid of heights. He possessed a rare skill for camouflage in hides at the top of tall buildings. To prevent the muzzle flash from giving away his position, he improvised a flash concealer for the end of his barrel and never fired in bad light. As a further precaution to reduce the visibility of the flash, he tried to position himself in front of a white wall. One day, he took Grossman with him. The easiest and most regular targets were the soldiers who brought forward food containers to the frontline positions. It was not long before an infantryman on ration detail appeared. Using the telescopic sight, Chekhov aimed 2 inches above the tip of the nose. The German soldier fell backwards, dropping the food container. Chekhov quivered with excitement. A second soldier appeared. Chekhov shot him. Then a third German crawled forward. Chekhov killed him too. 3. Chekhov murmured to himself. The full score would be noted down later. His best was 17 kills in 2 days. Shooting a man carrying water bottles was a bonus, Chekhov remarked, since it forced others to drink polluted water. Grossman posed the question whether this boy, who dreamed of foreign parts and who wouldn't hurt a fly, was not a saint of the patriotic war. The sniper cult produced imitators with different weapons. The battle of attrition continued around the Barikadi factory and Red October, with attack and counterattack. A battalion command post of the 305th Infantry Division, according to one officer, was so close to the enemy that the regimental commander could hear the Russian "Ura" at the other end of the telephone. A Russian regimental commander, however, was in the midst of the fighting. When his headquarters was overrun, he radioed for a Katyusha strike right onto his own position. German soldiers had to admit that the dogs fight like lions. Their own casualties mounted rapidly. The cries of "Sani, Hilfe" from the wounded became almost as much a part